Good afternoon, and welcome to Embracing Fear, a podcast mini-series from the Center for Public Theology and Migration. My name is Daniel Montañez, the Executive Director for the Center for Public Theology and Migration. And this afternoon, we have the honor of having Dr. Oscar García-Johnson with us this afternoon. In this series, we'll be reflecting on his new book, Embracing Fear, Christian Reexistence in the Trump Era. His work invites us to reconsider how the Christian faith does not call us to deny fear, but to confront it with honesty, theological depth, and hope. And together through this series, we will explore what it means to re-exist as followers of Jesus in a world shaped by empire, displacement, crisis, and uncertainty. We will ask how the church can bear witness to God's justice, accompany vulnerable communities, and cultivate a faithful imagination rooted not in despair, but in the liberating presence of the Spirit. So today we are honored once again to be joined by Dr. Oscar García-Johnson to discuss the second part of his four-part blog series and post that will be elaborating on this book. And this particular topic today that we'll be discussing is the refuge of authoritarian belonging. Why people sometimes choose their oppressors. So quite a title, quite an idea that we'll be talking about. But Dr. García-Johnson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Danielle, and audience. It's always a great opportunity and humbling on many ways. We're in a time where we cannot claim to be experts on a topic. We can only be listeners, sojourners, and in a way, learning as we share. We all have wisdom and we all have ignorance. We have to share both. Ignorance I don't see as a deficit. I say ignorance as an opportunity to learn together. To put it in the words of Boaventura de Sousa Santos, learn ignorance. And so, in that sense, I'm not claiming any particular expertise here more than the desire to learn together and to sometimes look at issues and experiences and even concepts that are promoted from a different perspectives so that we can have a different angle and understanding as well as we are making up our way to respond to them faithfully.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think you do an excellent job in kind of inviting us into this curiosity. And I think a lot of kind of this understanding of none of us are fully experts, but understanding things as they arise and emerge within our society. Part of what we do is we ask questions. We ask questions of what is happening at this particular moment, of this particular time. And we lean into those questions with curiosity to try to understand more deeply the present moment. And in this article, you actually ask a very thought-provoking question that I believe not enough people have asked. Not a lot of people have wrestled with the reality of this notion. And your question that you ask is, why do oppressed communities sometimes seek refuge in the very systems that oppress them? Why do often oppressed communities, why do oppressed people often side or come alongside their oppressors? And I'd love for you to kind of walk us through and explore this idea of what do you mean by this? What is the relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor? And maybe what are some examples of how you've seen that in recent years, particularly among Latino immigrant faith communities, maybe or wherever else you've seen it within our society?
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I was thinking, how to continue to bring these ideas and perspectives back to us and try to make them a little more digestive, to our system. And I'd like to begin by clarifying what do I mean by oppression, and also how do I see, participation in oppressive systems as something that is more common than we're really to acknowledge. So why, you see, why it appeals. Oppression, I mean, whatever we want to say, there are several oppressive systems in place right now, and there have been always, but right now we seem to have a moment, a revival of authoritarian leaderships around the world, not just in the United States where I live, but in many places, some before and some after. As a matter of fact, according to certain political scientists and sociologists, the very context of Latin America in the early 80s, 90s, became the very location where, dictators were very famous. I mean, not it wasn't the only place, but there were numerous dictators all the way from the 1950s, you know, after the World War II, all the way, and at the same time, so moving forward all the way after the 1970s. But lately, interestingly, Latin America is not the place that we can call the center of or the location of dictators. They're spread out all over the place. And also, the same type of regime have been exercised here in the United States. I mean, we can agree on that on the basis of research and on the basis of political discussions. Some people may feel that those dictatorships are more righteous, or they may feel there's no righteous dictatorship. At the end of the day, is the same thing. Whatever the case may be, one thing is clear: it's a worldwide phenomenon at this point. But so why it appeals and why it succeeds? That's kind of an interesting question. And me as a theologian, I have to admit that I had to do a lot of work just to get into that, because I'm not trained in that. I'm trained in something else. I'm trained in doctrines, histories of the church, very much church based, and sometimes you do culture analysis and things like that. But political science and the interaction of power, faith, institutions, and religion is not what we do. So I've had to do my lift, so to speak. So let me begin by clarifying, at least for the audience, what do I mean by oppression? Oppression is a structured form of domination, or you may call it governance. We can change the concepts, but at the end of the day, the operation is the same. So, a structured form of domination or governance, which has to do a whole arrangement of life: politics, economics, culture, education, religion, even human right, the whole arrangement of life in a metropolitan context, is part of that structured form of domination. Now, this is the issue. Why is that bad? Well, governance in itself is not necessarily evil if it's shared, if people participate in it. But here is the problem. It is oppression when that structured form of domination is disguised as order, law, prosperity, and moral good. Again, I'm going to admit, it's disguised as order, law, prosperity, and moral good. And the way this operates is by significantly increasing the value and agency and future development of the few, while on the backside of that diminishes the dignity, agency, and future of the many. So we have the many and the few, to utilize a common language in politics. So the many are diminished in value, in dignity, and the future horizons of development of the many are diminished, or at least contained in the privilege and leadership and rule of the few.
Yeah.
So it is, and the few all of a sudden emerge as the most valuable, as the most successful and resourceful and futuristic possibilities for the prosperity of everybody. So pretty much power, value, privilege, and possibilities are in the hands of the few. And those few need to rule us. The message is unquestionable. Adapt or perish. As a single message. We can complicate it all, but you either adapt or you perish. And that perish means you're gonna have to leave this country, or you're gonna have to simply be quiet. You have to be inexistent. You cannot participate in the civil life and the order of society. And here is the thing. The noise and what we call the rhetoric is this. If you're part of the many and you conformed, you will receive the benefits of progress. Yeah, it may feel you're not included enough, that you're not valued enough, that it may feel temporarily, and I don't know if you've heard that. We may suffer a little bit right now. That's the language, not only in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. Well, we're in a moment of transition. We're renewing society. We're bringing things back to order, law, prosperity, and moral good. That's the framework right there. And so in that sense, we're in a moment of, it will get worse before it gets better. That is the rhetoric is. But if you stay with us, the many, the one that are feeling the pain, the one that have families being persecuted, sometimes exterminated, and criminalized with no evidence. If you stay with us, you will see the benefits of progress. That is the rhetoric. And that, in a way, is important. So, and on the other side, if you choose not to conform, there's only poverty, suffering, and immorality in resisting that governance. And so this is important. This is not new. Already in the 1960s, we have Paulo Freire in the pedagogy of the oppressed anticipating that this, oppression works because it is an effort in converting our consciousness. Meaning, the whole point is I will call it today, training the imagination of the oppressed.
Yeah.
Is the main tool, the main seduction of oppression. So that's what I mean by oppression. And unfortunately, the big oppression works in a way because there's sort of an anatomy. If you're looking, you can see how that operates. And I'm gonna stop after I give you what I believe are at least five signs that we are under an oppressive system, and sometimes we may be functioning as an ally of oppressing system. Because I think if we're clear in what is oppression and what does it mean to participate and not participate in oppression or oppressive systems, the way I'm putting it, we're gonna be able to see many other aspects of what I'm trying to communicate to you. Number one, let's clarify something. The oppressor is not just one individual. It's never that way. It wouldn't succeed if it's that way. It's never one individual. It is perhaps very concretely, appreciated in the leadership of one individual, but that individual, it is the product of a system, of a set of interests that enable and empower that individual, without which that individual cannot do what that individual does. So it represents institutions, movements, and imperial systems, political, economics, religious, cultural, judicial, etc. The single task of the oppressor and in an oppressive system is to convert fear into obedience and belonging. Because of what I said, the oppression is. You adapt. So converting fear into obedience and belonging, it's the simple task. That's a successful leader if that leader can do that. So there's at least 5 ways to do that. Number one, as an oppressor or an oppressor that is leading an oppressive system, I will do at least 5 things. There are many more. There are several people writing that, but I will do number one. I will exploit unmet needs of people, of the many, migrants, minorities, LGBTQ, Muslim, all that will become part of the social anxiety, you know. And if I am successful, I'm going to utilize those as the source of the problem, because I need a problem to solve. If I am bringing order, there's somebody's creating disorder, immorality, unlawfulness. So I need to identify, categorize that in a way that I can present it to different people and say, look, this is the phase that we need to. So number one, I just exploit the unmet needs of people that are watching me, and I saying this is the problem. Number two, I offer order without justice. Order without justice. So the many are policed and the few are rewarded. We can see that in how, for example, all of a sudden, several very interesting companies right now have been given the favor of the judicial system to become richer, more affluent than ever, while the many are suffering greatly under economic hardship. Now we can say, oh, there is look, things are not as bad. For whom? Who are you talking about? Because many are suffering right now. So it's order without justice. And that is a typical part of the anatomy. Number three, divide and conquer. That's all. Divide and conquer. That's an old dynamic. One vulnerable group usually is responsible for another vulnerable mystery. Meaning, you see, and that is a strategy. Blacks, for example, African American communities, and naturalized citizens suffer because undocumented immigrants. That's the rhetoric right there. There is undocumented immigrant, which, by the way, are presented as criminals without any evidence that that's the case. Because what we're seeing is the persecution of families that have been working for years and years without a criminal record, but they are criminals nonetheless. So that is part of the whole issue, divide and conquer. So I believe that somebody else's is the truth. And finally, last two I can just simply name. You choose. If I'm in an oppressive moment and I'm ruling, I really need allies, and I will use religious bodies to sacralize hierarchy. The Bible needs to be included. Bible verses utilized as ornaments of my way of doing politics. The ruler is now all of a sudden becomes the chosen of God, and the land, it's a sacred space that I need to rule because I got all these legalities. So Christian nationalism is flourishing right now under what I just said right now. And finally, you need to do something that is unbelievably successful. You need to recruit. I need to recruit wounded people to carry the dirty work. I will find people that want to believe everything that I just said, to represent the goodness of this government. And so those who accept that role do that, I would say, some of them conscious and some of them very unconsciously. And I think that I'll end right there because there's enough in what I just said. I don't know what's your reaction, Dan. I mean, you're
No,
an expert on
absolutely.
this area.
No, I mean, thank you for that analysis and framing just these larger systems and structures. I absolutely love those 5 points and kind of helping us understand that. And I think you're absolutely right. What we are seeing is not something that is merely a U.S. movement or happening under a particular authoritarian regime, but is something that has been present within not only the history of Latin America, but also it is a global phenomenon that is happening right now. I think we are seeing kind of these religious nationalist ideologies and movements beginning to happen in a wide variety of ways and wide variety of spectrums, and understanding kind of the relationship between who is taking control, who is taking power, and what are the narratives in which they are perpetuating, and how they use those narratives to bring in those who are oppressed and kind of use those ideologies to bring a type of colonization of the imagination to fit according to their purposes. What we're seeing here is not new. Something that I've said in the past is that when humans try to be God over other humans, they become inhumane. And I think that's really where we see the crux of that relationship between the oppressed and the oppressor. When people begin to, governing is something that is established by God. However, when humans begin to do this in ways that are exploitative, that are manipulative, that are harmful and hurtful, and seeking for the self-interests of the few over the many, then we begin to see this reality happen. And again, as we've seen here, that this history itself is not new within U.S. society. And I think we see this. I'd love for us to take a moment to focus in on a particular story within Latin American history. You've talked a little bit about kind of how we've seen this in the 80s and 90s, but one could argue that this dynamic has existed since really the inception of the Latino identity of the Spanish, the African and the indigenous coming together at the early ruminations of Mesoamerican history. And there's a particular figure within the period of the 1600s that's known to be controversial in many ways, many directions, and this person is known as La Malinche. Is an idea that has been brought about within a lot of Latino history and just exploring the dynamics and the relationships with mestizaje. I mean, you are one of the leading scholars on this notion idea of mestizaje, and we see that it's not only a cultural identity, but it also has political implications even within its time. So I would love for you maybe just to press into this story and kind of help us think about this story of Malinche to think about identity, survival, power, and belonging within both her local context and also today.
Yeah, well, you're bringing a character in the history of the Americas um that are sort of, let me begin by saying that I am not one of those scholars that utilized Malinche as a scapegoating for the betrayal of the indigenous people with the um with the foreign powers. Uh, there are other figures,
Hmm.
in my opinion, are more clear figures that have participated, into that. Um, because in the case of Doña Marina La Malinche, we have a women in a colonial era
Hmm.
that has been, in a way, um, it has been enslaved.
Enslaved, yeah.
It has been forced
Hmm.
to utilize her indigeneity
Hmm.
as a way of communicating the political vision of an imperial moment.
Hmm.
Which choice or which um, opportunities does somebody in her case, in general, in Europe, women were already, oppressed. The witch hunting, the feminization of evil that is happening in the 15 and 17, one of the big genocides are that of women. It's already happening in Europe. So that is brought into the Americas
Hmm.
with the conquest. So on top of the fact that this is happening already there, and it's an evil that is brought into here. You have now the indigeneity, the is this being that is unclearly fully human and clearly evil. So unclearly human, but definitely evil because women nature in a way it's suspicious of witchcraft and all that kind of evil, of easily seduced, and that has some references to Eve in the Bible. You know what I'm saying? All that
Mhm.
in the biblical imagination, as understood in some patristic and Hellenistic, figures. So that is already put into that figure.
Mhm.
And I have read enough and seen enough in the historical records of women in the colonial era to see the complexities they were having. They were not only enslaved, they were forced to be the concubines,
Yeah.
and their children were not fully recognized.
Mhm.
And at the same time, they were also um, utilized as channels of communication
Mm.
to pacify that. So I am not saying that women in the indigenous communities were not easily given up to that, but what I'm saying that the choices for women
Yeah.
to resist in the physical way, in the political way, and even in the theological way. That's why we got a Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz resisting, very interesting,
Right.
in through her intellectual, very subversive intellectually in a different way, But so it are much more limited. So in that sense, I think for me, the Malinche or Doña Marina, it's more a metaphor of what do you do when you don't have a choice
Mhm.
but to
Mhm.
cope with this system.
Yeah.
And yet, I will never give up everything that I am to the system
Mhm.
because I need to survive enough days as to look for the opportunity to actually transfer something that is there for me. This place of Nepantla that I work, that hidden place of existence that I can give, so that the seed of indigeneity can continue to exist in one way or another in the middle of totalitarian systems. So, not trying to romanticize here
Mm-mm.
that, but I'm saying that in that particular case that you mentioned, and I've read Octavio uh, Paz and several people, I think those are a bit too quick to go
Yeah.
into
Mhm.
sort of a Creole theory of identity, and I think the Malinche represents more a crisis
Mhm.
than a betrayal. It is a crisis
Yeah.
right that we need to identify. And I think it's more a metaphor of awareness for me. This is
Mhm.
what's happening. This is why, in a way, many families have to cope with this. But on the other hand, what is it that is also we can do with La Malinche?
Yeah.
How can we connect with her to say, you're not alone,
Yeah.
Malinche. There are other forms. And by the way, you're not alone and we're not blaming you.
Right.
Not the Judas.
Yeah.
You're just another victim of this society. How can
Mhm.
we transform the Malinche into perhaps an Esther?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I appreciate you going in that direction and kind of helping us understand those nuances. I completely agree in what you're sharing about how this particular figure was one that was enslaved and in many ways treated as property in her particular time. And I think in many ways, I think her story can help us challenge can help challenge us to understand the ways in which maybe even those communities today who do find themselves subject to systems of oppression or do find themselves in kind of these very precarious places can find ways to begin to survive in the midst of those realities. And I think more so I think it's telling as well because it challenges us not only about those who are subject to systems of oppression, but more so those who choose to self-select
Absolutely.
into systems of oppression. And
Absolutely.
I
Well
think
said.
I think that's where we begin to see this real problematic nature. I mean, Malinche was somebody, again, as you shared, who was subject to the particular moment and principles of her time. She gave birth to a child of Hernan Cortes, and in many ways is a complex figure. But those who choose
Yeah.
to say yes to the system of oppressions, who
Yeah.
seek to willingly compromise their identity or their peoplehood for the sake of finding um, some type of benefit, no matter how marginal that benefit may be, I think is where we begin to wrestle with these realities, well, the multiple realities of why people might find themselves in these systems of oppression, how they
Yeah,
submit to them.
yeah, as you're talking, let's remember, at least in the Americas, we since we're talking about authoritarianism, and in a way that is demonstrated in a way that is important there by external power and by the reaction, you have the emperor and the conqueror and the colonizer coming from outside, and then in order to resist that and fight that, you
Hmm.
generate another character in our in
Right.
our in our in our context is called the dictator. The
Hmm.
dictator is the one which is trained with the weapons of the master to
Hmm.
cut the head of the master and to is the political liberator, so to speak. And yet I'm going to appeal here to Vasconcelos, Jose Vasconcelos from Mexico. He
Hmm.
said we were able to achieve political liberation from the colonial powers, and we were able to use weapons, but our consciences were never liberated.
Right.
And so we
Yeah.
fought, we fell into another power, he said,
Right.
which is even bigger than Spain and Portugal,
Hmm.
which is, he was alluding to the United States.
Yeah.
It's bigger because Great Britain and that it's the power already winning in Europe. And that's the power we're in a way being submitted here without us having a clear. And he would say the part of our whole issue is that we don't have an ethnic doctrine. He would say that we continue to be divided. We will say that the Africans are inferior, that the indigenous are part of the whole issue, women and all that. And he would say we need that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And that actually brings me to think about how this notion of how oftentimes it is the colonized imagination that kind of shapes that empire uses to shape the imaginations of oppressed communities. And oftentimes I think one of the most sinister ways in which it does it is that it confuses the interests of their own with the interests of empire. It is those who are within oppressed communities, within marginalized communities, oftentimes empire itself begins to make them think that their own self-interests are the interests of the oppressed. And many times oppressed communities do seek some type of way to embrace those types of ideologies or values, thinking that it is within their own interests without understanding or fully seeing that in many ways one can be supporting a particular candidate or a particular
Yeah, yeah,
person
yeah, yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
may be aligned on certain social issues, but in reality is deporting our
Yeah,
communities and
absolutely.
immigrant communities in ways that are completely destructive.
Yeah.
How do we begin to combat that or begin to resist those types of modes of thinking?
Well, no, number one, I would say, um, I think okay, let me situate myself as a religious leader. By the way, I'm an ordained pastor. I'm an ordained pastor. So When I, as a pastor, let me put my shoes here, use my shoes here. When I, as a pastor, as a religious leader, I do not know my own history. I do not know um, how politics, religion, and place and bodies have worked together in the kind of way that we're talking about, or which is even worse. So number one is ignorance. Number two is political convenience. When I choose that this is not the story I want to look at right now,
Right.
I prefer to look at a different narrative. It's not the narrative of conquest. It's not the narrative of struggle. It's not the narrative of survival. It's not the narrative of God walking with struggling communities, just making us live another day. I don't choose that. I choose the triumphalist version of um, uh, that I read this is a selective, this is another problem, and I've been writing about it, a selective biblical approach that I will use the conqueror and the triumphalist as the narrative that I choose. And I will adopt that personality for today. And I would say, God is working with the conqueror.
Mm-hmm.
So God, this is a narrative that I'm is not just, let me be very clear here. It's not Cyrus,
Mm-hmm.
because Cyrus is just one among many. It is Caesar. It's different. Because when you put Cyrus, you can put everything you want and the Old Testament theology, and unfortunately, we have some dominionist theology, which is selectively saying this is, and we put that name to our leaders and things like that. But we don't. Interesting, we don't put the name Caesar, because Caesar is
Mm-hmm.
more complicated. Caesar is
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. Caesar is the New Testament. You see, it's easier to selectively go to the Old Testament, but it's more difficult to go with the story of Jesus, to belong to the story of Jesus. Jesus is always the problem for misinterpretation of the Bible. So, and choosing that all of a sudden against the Bible, God is with Caesar.
Mm.
God is choosing Caesar rather than Kyrios Jesus Christus. That's a very against. You see, we use the Bible sometimes to find that we're against the Bible. And in that sense, I think it's a couple problems. Number one, we're misleading ourselves in the history of our own context, and we're also misleading in a biblical formation that can read the whole story. So we're malformed in a way, leading peoples into accepting and conforming to situations that I don't think the Spirit of God or God is asking us to conform to. That's why in this book I speak embracing fear. So which fear I'm saying we're embracing? Well, I said clearly in the last blog. There is the tradition of the fear of empire, and there is a tradition of the fear of God.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of God will make us
Yeah.
witnesses,
Yeah.
martyrium. The fear of empire will make us conformist.
Yeah.
So it is with the fear of God that we have to face the fear of empire. Which are we going to choose?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you bringing up that point specifically because I think what you're highlighting is that oftentimes the way in which those who find themselves, those who align with those who are oppressed, who align with the oppressor, sometimes it's not only that they are compromising culturally with their community, but they're also compromising theologically with their community. I think we've seen that in many ways with with many people who begin to align themselves kind of with this more Christian nationalistic vision and kind of taking one's theology to the place of saying this particular candidate is God's anointed or God's
Yeah,
individual,
sure.
therefore we must support this person. I think this becomes a very dangerous place in which we find ourselves in. And when these particular individuals begin to speak on behalf of and represent those marginalized communities themselves, I think we begin to find ourselves in a very problematic moment as a church, which leads me, I think I'd love for us to take a small pivot in another direction that I believe is somewhat related to this. So it's been about 3 months since the release of a very historic statement called "We Are Not a Monolith." We are not a monolith, we are a multitude. It was a statement where Latino Christian pastors, scholars, and leaders across the country spoke out against the harms that this President Trump administration has been doing amongst immigrant communities and challenged the idea that Latino Christians are represented by one particular voice or one particular idea. Now, it was very interesting when this statement was released because there were some people who chose to sign it, and there are others who didn't choose to sign it. And there's a variety of reasons as to why that might have been the case. But I would love to ask you, why was it important for you to add your name to this statement? And what do you think kept some Latino Christian leaders from doing the same? What do you think that this reveals about the tensions of fear, belonging, power for the future of the Latino immigrant church in the United States?
All right. I'm a scholar, and my tendency is to categorize and to put big titles here, and I have a temptation right now of saying there are different categories here, and I may want to use the militia as one category. One category is those who say this is a triumphalist moment. God and us are on the same page. We're working with Caesar right
Hmm.
now. Constantinian moment. It's not a biblical moment. Constantinian is not biblical, but it's a Constantinian moment, meaning,
Right.
you know, I've chosen to believe that God is here. And because God is here, any evil, it's okay. Because God is here. He's gonna be responsible. I'm not responsible. I'm just doing what I believe God is supporting. And so I adopt a very skewed ethics and say, this is not my. I just think, there's a whole bunch of us that think the same way. So I I am that. So that is a very irresponsible, dangerous, and we will have to face the Lord, and we will have to face our communities
Hmm.
and give an answer to them. And I've seen that happen. I've seen people who've done that to say, well, I'm sorry. I thought we were wrong. I've seen people doing that, and that's okay. But I
Hmm.
think we don't need to wait for that. And what you were saying, those who in the category to saying this is who we are, we're in a triumphalist moment, and this reminds me one of the reasons I wrote actually Embracing Fear. I was reading a text in Boaventura de Sousa Santos, Epistemologist of the Thought, where he was dealing with fear and hope. And he said, different communities relate this to human experiences in different ways. When you have fear without hope,
Hmm.
you got fatalism, annihilation, or conformity. And when you have hope without fear, you have triumphalism,
Hmm.
you have arrogance, and you have genocide coming your way. So, um, I think there is in the Lord the balance between fear and hope.
Hmm.
And people that are simply saying this is our moment of triumph without fear
Hmm.
are at the risk of a genocide. And by genocide, I don't mean we're gonna have to call. There are different ways that genocide happened. The annihilation of there are several, Gen Zs and millennials that are simply going away from the church. because they're leaders that are saying this is what the church, or this is what my denomination, or this is what whatever 40, 4,000, 5,000 churches believe, when in fact that's not true.
Right.
You go to those churches and every church is divided, and they have different views. But it's easy to say that as a statistic, a moment of informational capitalism. Put that as a statistic, then all of a sudden I have power. But anyway, I'm just saying that is hope without fear. Then the second level, so you will not sign that because you think that the statement is wrong.
Right.
But then you have the second, the Malinche, which I think in Malinche is a bit of it's a fear without hope moment. And until you see hope, you're not going to be able to say you're going to have to conform, because there's nothing else to conform, to accommodate, or you simply do a tragedy. You're going to go into violence, knowing that the other one will lose and you will lose. It's a dead deal. It's going to be a lose-lose. And then you have other people, other category, which I will call those who have hope, but also have fear. I think I consider myself among them. I have fear and I have hope. It's the fear of the Lord, again, the fear of empire. So I cannot simply stand here with a superficial, triumphalistic moment to say, the Lord will do what he wants to do. He will. And I'm part of that, but from another angle. And in that sense, I think it was my individual, but also personal and collective responsibility to speak against a false, fake, and dangerous representation of the many. Because what I just said, the many, I feel that when we utilize the many and put the many in our own statements in a triumphalistic way, when they're suffering, we are falling into the task of the oppressor. Because I define, remember, that the single task of the oppressor is to convert fear into obedience and belonging. So let's hope the Lord, because let's be obedient and let's belong to this moment. That is the task of the oppressor in such a time like this. I'm sorry, I'm being very direct.
No, thank you. Thank you for your clarity and for sharing your own heart and reasons as to why you chose to participate as in part of this movement. I think this was a historic statement that will continue to have its aftermath, its effects. I really do think that this will be a moment where people will look back on the history of the Latino church and begin to understand it as a line in the sand moment where people began to where the subaltern began to speak, if one might say, if those who existed as marginalized and subjugated communities began to say that we are not represented by one particular idea, that we are no longer being acted upon by history, but that we are going to act upon history itself and to begin to speak on our behalf. So, and I appreciate you, the way in which you navigated and kind of set up these different areas and ideas of how people may have responded and kind of where they find themselves within those categories. I think there is another layer of just the complexity of relationships within Latino immigrant communities themselves and understanding relationships and alliances and what may be considered more politically expedient in order to exist within the power structures that subjugate them themselves. And oftentimes to do something like signing a statement like this is something that can be risky or could put a particular political alliance into
Clearly,
danger.
when I can belong, for example, I know a friend that wanted to do that, but he can't because he's employed by an organization that is in this moment of hope without fear.
Yeah.
The triumphalistic moment. So anybody who's gonna speak against that will be disciplined in one way or another. So in that particular case, that person individually has a position of hope with fear. It's a fearful hope. It's a fearful hope. But it depends economically.
Right.
In that job, as family, younger kids, it's more complicated. There's not a lot. It's on a Malinche, in a sort of a Malinche because I don't want to also say the Malinche didn't have any hope. I
Right.
think the only hope is let me make it another day and see what happens.
Yeah.
Mañana será otro día. It's the sort of a mañana. It's a mañana ethic. I mean, I'm alive today by the grace of God, let's put it that way. But tomorrow will be another day. I will be looking, I will be seeing what can we do tomorrow. So in a way, I think that many people are caught up in that, but not many. I mean, not all of them. I mean, we many can speak in moments
Yeah.
like this and choose not to for, as I said, one or two reasons. One is deep ignorance, and the other one is simply a deep conviction that this is a moment of triumph without fear.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you kind of drawing us into this language of hope and what does it mean for us to exist in hope in the midst of fear as we exist. So I would love to kind of just wrap up our conversation to think about what does it look like for us to build a society around hope? And what is the types of hopes that we should be imagining for our immigrant communities today?
Okay, I think I said that last in the last interview. I mentioned um, fear as an important beginning. I mean,
Right.
I've been consistent and I'm continually pushed in that direction that we cannot build hope if we don't have fear. I
Right.
mean, if we don't embrace fear, it's not just have fear as an emotional component, is that it's an awareness. It's a
Mhm.
critical awareness of what's going on. There is a danger that is around me, and if not around me, around the communities that I belong to, or communities that are vulnerable, that I cannot choose simply to withdraw from. I have a responsibility with that. So there is imminent danger in oppressive systems, in authoritarian populist regimes like the one we have here in this country and in other places. Now, in this country, we still can resist in whatever way we can. Other places, it's even complicated as well. But Hungary right now just changed that. That's an interesting. After 10 years, they were able to come, you know, to the other side of things. Okay, of course, people will say, well, there's no innocent, but they were able to work their own things out. I think we're in that process right now, and other countries are in that process. Brazil was able to revert that as well, and there are different moments. But what I'm saying is this. So we need to embrace fear not as an emotional stage, but as a critical awareness that God is in our midst, giving us the tools to be aware of what may destroy us. But
Yeah.
God is with us, walking with us. And as we develop that awareness, we also see that the barriers and the frontiers and the borders that limit us were not there always and will not be there forever. There are entry points. There are also people across that border. So let's speak about those who believe this is a triumphalist moment. I have the hope that something's gonna happen there. And if I can make it happen, I will, if you let me. That they will come into senses to say, hey, look, I'm here, enjoying privilege and thinking that things are right, but I know they're not right for everybody, but I think they're right and they're going to be, but they will discover that God is also there across the border, is what I call a spirit outside the gate. God's in the other
Mm-hmm.
side of the gate.
Yeah.
And when you see God on the other side, you see, if you see God on the other side, then you have questions. You say, okay, what's going on here? I really believe in that.
Yeah.
That some may be coming into that awareness, not without some crisis,
Yeah.
but so you're gonna have allies. You're gonna have people that are developing into border crossing, and you have communities here that already exist in the cracks of empire, in the back alleys of society. These are communities of what I call re-existence. That's where I put
Yeah.
Babel and Pentecost.
Mhm.
And I gave some example. I mean, in the next, blog you'll see, but there's some examples of how different communities are navigating critical hope, or but for which I think they need to be an awareness of fear. It needs to be a fearful hope, if you will, so that we can move into a hope that is not superficial, that is not false, that is not fake, to use the language of the moment, fake hope, but it is hope that is rooted in the Spirit of God and the Spirit of the resurrected Jesus.
Amen. Well, I look forward to reading these next series of blog posts I'll be releasing, and I also appreciate the call and the allusion to the Spirit outside of the gate. It is a wonderful work as well. And just thank you for being a part of this conversation and helping us think about these complex but important topics for analysis, for analyzing the present moment within our communities. I'm very grateful for your voice and contributions to this series.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate very much what the center, with you and others are doing. This is a time where we need to join efforts in a direction that is constructive, critical, but constructive at the same time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you to everyone else for joining us for this episode of Embracing Fear, a podcast mini-series from the Center for Public Theology and Migration. At the Center for Public Theology and Migration, we are committed to transforming narratives on immigration through theological reflection and redemptive action. We invite you to follow this four-part series on Embracing Fear, which will be published each Monday throughout the month of June. You can find the first blog post and second blog post at theologyandmigration.com. So thank you all, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.